Good morning. Good morning. We begin today's daf Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph in Gittin. We begin by thanking our sponsors, We begin by thanking our Talmud Torah sponsor, Naftali Tilson of Telmond, Israel, in honor of the yahrzeit of his dear parents, Rabbi Yona ben Avraham Leyb, and Rivka bas Ya'akov, and their nishmas should have a liyam, the family should have an achama. We also thank the sponsors of the week of learning, Yehuda Jennie Goodhart, nishmas Yishaya Zalman ben Lazar. We also thank Binyamin Ilana Levin in honor of the birth of a granddaughter, Mazel Tov, Liora Sarah Levin. We thank Lou and Eddie Goldberg for sponsoring the daf today in commemoration of the yahrzeit and in memory of Lou Goldberg's mother, Miriam Sarah bas Aaron Zechariah on Zayin Tammuz, and Shamash having Aliyah, and the family having a chama. I think it would also be appropriate to dedicate today's daf in honor of all those who went to the chasana last night and came back and got here in time for daf this morning. So beautiful. We'll have a private dedication in honor of all those who are being most nefesh to be here this morning. We are going to begin on Daf Mem Amud Beis at the Mishnah again, because the Gemara Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph really is going on this Mishnah, and the Mishnah really is impossible to understand by just learning it by itself. This is one of these Mishnayos which is so cryptic. The language of the Mishnah is so cryptic. The pronouns of the Mishnah is so cryptic. Therefore, we have to learn the Mishnah again. We'll learn it very, very basically, and we'll try to understand it again from the Gemara. The Mishnah says, Daf Mem Amud Beis. We're starting from the Mishnah. It's about 10, 11 lines up from the bottom. Eved Shaso Rabba Potiki La'acherim. So let's just explain a couple of concepts. Apotiki. What does the word apotiki mean? Apotiki does not mean anything. Apotiki is not really a word. It doesn't have a definition. However, it is a compound of a couple different words put together, which generally means apo tehei kai. Rashi doesn't write it over here. Rashi and other Masechtas quotes it. You might see it on the side of your Gemara in some of the Tosfos, the Mosfei Rashi. But the concept of apotiki is the Likuti Rashi in the Eizvahadu Gemara quotes Rashi Baba Kama, which is apo tehei kai. What does this mean? That means that sometimes a person owes another person money, and at the time that that loan or that monetary obligation comes into place, the person specifies very clearly where the loan is going to be paid up from. So the person points at a particular, not even really a collateral, it's much more than a collateral. This is a real distinction. You are clearly distinguishing where the person's going to collect the money from. So there's two types of apotiki. A general type of apotiki is where a person says, let's say I owe you $1,000. I will pay back the $1,000 to you of cash. If I don't have the $1,000 of cash, I'm going to use this item, which is worth $1,000, and say, apo tehei kai, this item is going to pay back that loan. But I am clear that this is not the only item that I'm going to use to pay you back. If this item is gone, I have other things in my house that are worth $1,000. And if those things are gone, I'll get something else worth $1,000. But the idea really is, I'm just showing you, if I don't pay back the loan, if I'm not able to meet my financial obligation, I have something I can point to say, this is the item that I'm going to use to pay you back, to pay back the loan. That's called an apotiki stam. Apotiki stam means I point to an item, but it's not an exclusive item that I'm using to pay back the loan. It's an example of an item that I may use to pay back the loan. If that item is not available, so then I'll go to my other resources and get something else to pay back the loan. And apotiki meforish is where there's risk involved to the lender. I say to the lender, you're going to lend me money worth $1,000. I'm only going to use that item to pay you back. That's it. If that item is here, you'll get your money. That item is not here. Unfortunately, I have nothing else to use to pay you back. And there's a risk involved in the loan. The person says, I'm still willing to lend you the money, understanding that if that apotiki, if that particular item is no longer here, there's no way to pay back. So that's an apotiki meforish. An apotiki meforish means this is the only thing that I'm going to use. The bottom line is apotiki really is just a compound of a bunch of different words, which means apo tehei kai, which means upon this the loan will rest. So now, in this particular case, there's a person who happened to have owned a servant. He owned an eved, and he said to a lender, I would like to borrow money from you, and if I can't pay you back, I'm going to use this eved, this particular eved, as my source of payment. Now what happened? He was a wise guy. He freed the slave. So now his eved is actually what he's using as the source of payment for his loan, but he goes ahead and frees this eved. So now what happens? The halacha is, Shuras Hadin, by the strict letter of the law, Ein ha'eved chayiv klum. The eved does not owe anything. He didn't do anything. He has nothing to do with this. Rather, the Gemara says, Tikkun Olam, because we don't want to have a situation where people we'll see what the Tikkun Olam means, but for good, normal practices in the world, we're going to say, Kofen es rabo, we actually force the master, oso ben chorin, they actually make this person now, this eved, a ben chorin, v'koseh shtar al damav, and he writes a shtar, a contract, a note on his worth. And I'm saying a lot of he's over here because the Gemara is not clear who the he is. The Gemara is not either. We have to clarify, number one, who's the rabbo? The rabbo, the master already freed him. So what does it mean we forced the master to free him? He already did. So we're going to see in the Gemara that there's different understandings of who the he is. But in the basic understanding, when it says rabbo, it means the lender. We force the lender now to go repeat the shikhr, to repeat the freeing of this eved. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, Eino kosev ela meshachrer. He doesn't have to write anything. The only person who has to write something is the freer. The original owner has to write this letter, but not the slave. So in other words, as cryptic as this Mishnah is, let's just take it for what it is, and we'll go to the Gemara. The Gemara will explain exactly what everything means. So this is the line of the Mishnah. You have an Eved. What happened? His master went ahead and appointed him, specified him as an apoteki. V'shichru, and he, let's not say what he means, but he freed him. Now let's see. The Gemara asks the question, Mi shichru. Who is the one who actually said that this Eved will now become free? Amarav, Rav says, Rabbo Rishon, the first master. Now we're using the term Rabbo Rishon and Rabbo Sheni, although there really isn't a second master, but when we say Rabbo Rishon, that means his original owner. And in this case, what it means is the original owner decided to free this Eved. We're going to use the terminology that says Rabbo Sheni, his second master, that refers to the malva, to the one who lent the money. Although he's not at all the master of this person, but in our Gemara, in our discussion over here, we have two people who are possible or potential owners of the slave, even though it's not a real owner, but a person who's acting in the capacity as an owner to this slave. And therefore, we're going to refer to the lender of the money, to the malva, as Rabbo Sheni. So therefore, Amar Rav explains, when a Mishnah says V'shichoro, that he freed him, who is that? Rabbo Rishon, that is his original and legitimate master. And the Mishnah explains, Shuras Hadin, by the letter of the law, Ein ha'eved chayiv klum l'Rabbo Sheni. This slave that was freed is gone. He doesn't know anything to the second master. He has nothing to do with him, as a matter of fact. It's true that he would have been used as the source of payment to pay up that loan, but that didn't happen yet. He was freed before he was actually used to pay up the loan, and therefore, by the letter of the law, he owes absolutely nothing to the second master. Well, how do we know that? Rava. Like Rava's statement, Rava, Hektish, Chametz, V'shichrur, Mafkiyan Midei Shibud. There are three things that can actually uproot an obligation. Hektish. So, if I have something if I have an animal, and I make that animal into an apoteki, that this animal is going to be used to pay back my loans, then I maktish it. I consecrate it and give it to Hektish. Sorry, now it belongs to Hektish, and it's no longer going to be obligated to be used as the source of payment for that loan. Same thing with chametz. A person owns chametz, and then he uses that as an apoteki, and then Pesach comes along and gets rid of the chametz for Pesach. Again, now it can no longer be used as the source of payment for the loan. Vishichur, that's our case. A person uses an eved, he points to an eved as the source of what he's going to use to pay back the loan, and then he goes ahead, he frees this eved. So now that shekhur essentially removes the lien on this eved. The eved is no longer going to be a backup to the loan. Elam pnei tikkun olam. Rather, because of tikkun olam, we're going to see what that means very soon, because we want things to work out right without there being additional problems. What we do is, Shema yimtze'enu b'shuk. Maybe what's going to happen is, this eved is going to be found in the marketplace. V'yomar lo avdiata. The second guy is going to say, hey, hold on a second. Which eved are you? Are you the eved that used to work for Ruvain? I'll say yes. Says, oh, Ruvain owes me $1,000. And you, if I'm not mistaken, are the apoteki that was supposed to back up that loan. You're my eved. Now the truth is, he's not, because he was freed before the time of payment came up, and therefore he's completely off the hook. He has nothing to do with Rabbi Rishon. He's freed from Rabbi Rishon, from his original owner. He does not belong to the second guy either, because he was freed before the time of the loan payment came up, and therefore he's a free man. He has absolutely nothing to do with, let's call him Shimon. But because we don't want Shimon to walk over to him and say, hold on a second, you're my slave, therefore what we do is, Kof and its Rabbo Sheni v'osa oso ben chorin. We actually force the malveh, the lender, to also write an additional shtar shichrur to free him. So in a case where, let's just use names, Ruvain borrows, let's just say $10,000 from Shimon. And he says, Shimon, have no fear. I will pay you back. And here's my apoteki, here's my eved. This eved's going to back it up. Now, before the time of payment came up, Ruvain says, you know what, eved, I used you as a backup to this loan, but you are mishuchra, you are freed. He writes mishtar shikra, and he sets him off free. Now he can go on to his own life. So now, the $10,000 between Ruvain and Shimon, that's their business. But the slave, this eved right now, what does he have to do with anything? He was freed. Nevertheless, even though the truth is that this eved actually has nothing to do with Ruvain anymore because he was freed, and certainly has nothing to do with Shimon anymore because he was freed before the time of payment came up, nevertheless, we force Shimon to write another freedom document, an emancipation document to this eved. So like this, he can't approach him in the street and say, hey, Mr. Eved, you belong to me. You were supposed to be the lien. I had a lien on you with my loan. We don't want that happening. Why don't we want that happening? So, first of all, it's not nice. We can understand why that's not nice. The guy's a free man. We don't want people going and claiming ownership over him. But worse than that, Rashi says, V'yomer lo avdiata, if Shimon's going to actually claim he is his slave, so of course he won't be able to actually take possession over this person, but v'yotzi Lazar banav. So what's going to happen is people are going to say that this slave over here is going to get married. After an Eved Knani is freed, he becomes a Yid, he's Megayer, he becomes a Yid, and he's allowed to get married, and he has children. People are going to say, oh, you know the kids of that person? I'm pretty sure that their father is an Eved. Now, what's the difference? Akiva Eiger actually asks a whole bunch, asks a very strong kash over here. But the bottom line is, we're concerned that his kids will be psulim to kahuna. His children will be fine. They're allowed to marry Yidden. However, they can't marry a Kohen. So we're going to have, when all the Kohanim are going to say, oh, we're not marrying this guy's kids. Now, although it's true that people say that he was freed, but I've heard some rumors that he actually belongs to Shimon. So he's an Eved, his children are Avadim, his children are not able to marry Kohanim. Now, Kivega wants to know why Rashi doesn't just say that he himself's going to be an Eved. So he himself's going to have a hard time getting married. Right? But we'll leave that kasha to Kivega. The bottom line is, that's the real problem. We're not just worried that people are going to call him an Eved, which is not nice. We're worried that it's actually going to affect the ability of either him or his children to get married. Therefore, we force Shimon to write what's really an unnecessary document of shechur, of emancipation, because we don't want anybody to be able to say, oh, this Eved belongs to Ruvain. Oh, this Eved belongs to Shimon. Therefore, both Ruvain and Shimon write this document of Shechur to the Eved, and therefore it's going to all be cleared up and everything's okay. That's the way Rav understands the Mishnah. So, again, clearly, Ruvain owes money to Shimon. He uses his Eved as the collateral. He puts a lien on the Eved. He frees the Eved. Now the halacha is, me'ikra din, from the strict letter of the law, nothing else needs to be done. However, in order to protect the dignity and the kashrus of this Eved, we make the second owner, whose name is Shimon, who really never was an owner, never will be an owner, nevertheless make him write this document of Shechur to free the Eved a second time. Now, what happens after that is, the Kosev Eved Shtar Al Damav. In the additional line over there is, and now the Eved is actually going to have to write an IOU note, that he actually owes money because he ended up benefiting from this. So therefore he writes another, he doesn't have any money at this point because he's an Eved. So he writes a shtar to Shimon because as a result of this whole situation, he ended up getting freed earlier. And Shimon Gamliel disagrees. He says, "Ein Eved kosev ela meshacher." He doesn't write anything. The Eved has no reason to have any financial obligation over here. Rather, who's the one who has to write the IOU note? It's going to be the meshacher, which is the first, the lender, the borrower, the first borrower. Now he's the one who has to write a note to Shimon. Why? Because he owes him money, and therefore he's the one who has to write that note. Now, what's the argument of here? What's the machlokus between the first opinion and the second opinion? The mazik shibudo shel chavera kamiflagi. This is a discussion of mazik shibudo shel chavera. Basically, it's a kind of like an idea of a really glorified grama. What happens is, again, everybody understands the concept that I can't steal from you. So if you own something and I break it, so that's really, let's start more simple. You own something and I take it, that's geneva or that's gazela. There's also a concept called hezek, where I break your thing. I take something which belongs to you and I break it. That's hezek. The Gemara in Bava Kama has extensive discussions about the halachas of hezek if I cause you damage. However, what happens if I don't actually damage something that you really own, but I damage something that you would have had the ability to be able to collect? So that's what happens in our case. You have a shibud. This Eved is actually backing up the loan. And now, what did I do? I went ahead and I ruined your ability to be able to collect. So I didn't damage something which belongs to you, but I ruined the lien. I damaged the lien, and therefore, now you're not able to collect. Now, grama is the concept of when I indirectly cause damage to you. I do something which indirectly causes damage. This is more the concept of closer to the concept of Sorish Darasa Shachavera. A person burns a document, which is a garmi. It's a much stronger type of damage. So here is like an intermediate type of case where I didn't actually burn the documents that give you the ability to collect the money, but I took away your ability to collect your loan because I ruined the lien. So that's the machlokus. The mazik shibudo shel chaver kamiflagi. They're arguing in a case where a person damages the lien that backs up a loan. The mar savar chayiv, umar savar pater. The machlokus in our Mishnah is whether that's going to be chayiv or pater. Itmar nami. We also have another brisa. Hamazik shibudo shel chavero. The person goes ahead and damages the lien of his friends. Banon machlokus b'shimon gamliel v'rabbanon. That is actually the machlokus between Shimon Gamliel and the Rabbanon, where Shimon Gamliel is going to say, listen, you went ahead and you freed the slave, so therefore you ruined my lien. Therefore you have to pay for it. And the Rabbanon are going to say that he's not chayiv in such a case. Ula disagrees with Rav and says you're misunderstanding the whole Mishnah. Mi shichuru, who's the one who did the freedom over here? Rabo Sheni. It was Shimon. So again, we have to repeat, Rabo Sheni is just language to point out Shimon. He's not really an owner of anything. This sometimes people get like this. Shimon lends $10,000 to Reuven. And Reuven says, ultimately, I'm going to use the Eved to pay you back. Now, he didn't use the Eved to pay him back. But Shimon starts to get excited. You start to think, look at me. I got an Eved coming my way. I'm essentially the owner of that Eved. He starts to get excited about his power over the Eved, and he goes ahead and he actually frees him. Now, that's nothing. He has no ability to free someone else's Eved. He's not a master at all, but he considers himself to be an Eved. So therefore, Shura Sadin, by the letter of the law, Ein Eved Chayiv Klum B'mitzvos. The Eved is not free. Since he's not free, he's still an Eved Kanani. He doesn't have to keep mitzvahs more than an Isha, and therefore he's not chayiv any more mitzvahs. However, because he's taken olam, we make him keep mitzvahs. Once he's already called the ben chorin, kofinis rabo rishon v'osa osa ben chorin. People heard there's this thing that happened. Oh, you know what? There's a transaction between Reuven and Shimon. Reuven used to be the owner. Shimon's becoming the owner. Shimon freed him. Maybe he is free. Once that happens, we say, you know what? All this questionable stuff over here, Reuven, quickly get Shecher out and free this guy. Now, because the Shtar al-Damav, who writes the Shtar al-Damav? It would seem like the second guy. The second guy now caused Reuven to have to free his slave. So he has to actually write a shtar for the damage that he did by freeing someone else's slave, which in turn forced Reuven to go ahead and free his slave. Shimon Gamliel says, "Ain't no kosev el meshachar." No, the meshachar actually is one who has to write that note. What's the machlokas? The argument, the concept of hezek she'eino nicker. Hezek she'eino nicker means sometimes you can cause a person damage, but it's not recognizable damage. In other words, there's a value damage that happens over here, but you can't actually see it. Examples would be where a person goes ahead and is makdish someone else's item. So in a case like that, you can't see the damage. The animal is not going to, or the item is not going to be broken, but its value, he no longer has the ability to be able to have any benefit from that value. So that's what happens in our case. They cause damage, but the damage is not recognizable because it's not something you can actually see. So hezek she'eino nicker doesn't mean it's covered. So, for example, if I were to, bang into someone else's car, and the outside of the car looks fine, but I ruined the engine, that's hezek nicker, because just open up the hood, you'll be able to see the damage. Doesn't mean it's covered. It means that with after all examinations from the eye, you can't see the damage. However, in value, you've severely decreased the value of this item. And that's what happens in this case. He went ahead and said something, and then ultimately forced him to be able. He forced him to lose the value of his eved. Mar savar shmehezek, mar savar lo shmehezek. That's machlokas in our Mishnah between the Rabbanan and Shimon Gamliel. Ulo my time lo amar karav. Why is it that Ulo does not say like Rav? Why is he arguing? In other words, why is he arguing and saying that shikuru means the second guy went ahead and freed him? Armalach Sheni Rabo Karaslay. Are you going to call the second guy actually the Rabbi, the master? For Rav Matayim lo amar kula. Why did Rav not say like Ula? Amalei Sheni Meshachar Karaslay. Can you call the guy a Meshachar? So therefore, in other words, both of them have a problem with the language. And this is what we really addressed this earlier by pointing it out, but they had a problem with the language, and therefore they went ahead and assumed it was talking about the other person. Itmar ha'osa sadei apotiki. Once we're talking about this concept of an apotiki, we start to talk about other halachas. Itmar ha'osa sadei apotiki. A person sets aside his field as an apotiki lacherim. It's an item which is going to be a collateral for payment for a loan. He puts a lien on it. V'shatva nar. Unfortunately, the nar overflowed and it took over this piece of property. So now, if you look at Rashi, it's not talking about simply. If you look at Rashi, v'shuv kol asada v'guf akarka mukulkol shamayim tzafan od la'olam alea. It's not just talking about that it got wet temporarily. This guy owned a piece of property, and there was a major storm, and as a result of the storm, the river just expanded and completely took over this field. So the field is now going to permanently be buried under this river. So it's worthless. It's essentially worthless. You can't do anything with it. He owns the river, but what's he going to do with that? Therefore, it's not worth anything. So what's the halach? B'shat v'nar, it was overtaken by the river. Ami shapir na'a. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ami, who is shapir na'a, he's a pretty good-looking guy. That's what it means, literally. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he said, Eino gova mishar nechasim. Sorry, it was pointed that you got this field, and unfortunately, your bad luck, it was taken over by the river. Therefore, you have nothing else to collect from. Bavur the Shmuel Amar, and the father of Shmuel said, gova mishar nechasim. Yes, he can claim from other things. Listen, you owe me $1,000 or $10,000. You promised this field to back it up. Now the field's not here, so pay me up from something else. Amar of Nachman bar Yitzchak. Nachman bar Yitzchak said, Mishum na'ami shapir nahu, Omer shmaitet lo shapirin. This guy thinks just because he's good looking, he can say something which doesn't make sense. In other words, the idea was he was known as the good looking guy, but the brisa he was teaching wasn't so good looking. People didn't like this. The guy owes somebody money, and he pointed to a field, and he said he'll pay him back, which is because he was a good looking guy, gives him the right to say something which doesn't make any sense. Gemara says, we mentioned at the beginning of the shir that there's two types of an apoteki. There's an apoteki stam, where I point to something and say, this is where you're going to get paid back from. However, that doesn't come to the exclusion of other items. However, there's an apoteki miforish. There are some types of apotekis which I'm saying to somebody, my dear friend, I'm borrowing this money from you, but I'm letting you know the only place you'll be able to collect from is the real property that I own right now, and it's this particular property at this particular address. If I don't have it anymore by the time the loan has to be paid back, unfortunately, the loan won't be paid back. There's risk involved in such a loan. The halacha is that in such a case, if that piece of property is no longer there, then yes, the lender loses the money. And that's what Ami Shapir was talking about, which actually was talking a very beautiful teaching, because that case was talking about where he pointed specifically to that piece of property and nothing else. Tanina Mihachi, we have a similar brisa which actually says the same thing. Person points to his field and he makes an apoteki for somebody else. Shat fanar, and the river takes over that field. Govet mishar nechasim. He can indeed collect from other property. However, v'im amar lo lihelecha pirayin elamizu. If he said, this is the only place you'll be able to collect from, this particular field at this particular address, and nothing else, which we're referring to that as an apoteki meforish. Eino govet mishar nechasim. He cannot collect from anything else. And unfortunately, he has to sustain the loss. Tani idach, another brisa which said the same thing. Person makes his field into an apoteki for a balchov. He owes him money. Uliksubas isha, and two, he actually uses it to back up the ksuba that he signed that he promised to his wife. Govin mishar nechasim. He can the balchov, the lender can collect from other property. Shimon Gamliel says, Balchov, indeed, yes, it's true, Gov Mishar Nechasim. The Balchov can collect from other property. Isha Eino Gov Mishar Nechasim. However, his wife, whose ksuba was signed and connected to this piece of property, she cannot collect from other Nechasim. Why? Shein Darka Shal Isha Lachzer Al Batei Dinim. It is not normal for a woman to have to start going to Beis Din to start negotiating with them that which piece of property. In other words, just to explain this, the umdana, this is the concept of an umdana, of an assumption, a very strong assumption that we're going to make. A person gets married and he signs a ksuba to his wife. That's generally a very happy time in their life. Now the ksuba is a document that a husband signs promising all kinds of good things to his wife and promising to take care of her, all these beautiful things he's going to do to take care of his wife. In addition to that, he makes promises, kind of prenuptial agreements, what will happen if the marriage does not work out. He does not want to write in that document that she's going to have to go ahead and jump through all kinds of hoops to try to go ahead and collect the money that she has. So it's two sides of the coin, because on the one hand he says, I want you to know this is the piece of property that's used to back up your ksuba. If anything ever happens, you know where it is. you know how to get it, you know what it looks like, you know everything you need to know about it. You don't have to start going to Beis Din to try to track down my properties, see which ones they own, and get people off of it. I'm just promising you this piece of property. That makes it much easier. The same side, the other side of that coin is that that's the only piece of property that he's giving her. So he gives it to her like that because it's much easier for her, but the result, the consequence of that is that she's not getting any other piece. So that's the umdana of what happens at that point in time, and therefore, a piece of property that's used to back up a ksuba is going to be considered an apoteki meforish, and only that piece of property, and only that piece of property is what he uses to back up the ksuba, and nothing else. The Mishnah continues, Misha chetziv eved v'chetziv ben choron. A person who is the half eved and half ben choron. So what does that mean? Rashi tells us this is talking about a case where an eved was owned by two different owners, and one of them went ahead and said, you know what, I want to let you free. So the Mishnah says, Oved es rabo yom echad, v'esatzmo yom echad. He has to work for the remaining master for one day, and on the other day, he's free. So let's just say Reuben and Shimon owned this Eved, so he worked for Reuben on Sunday, Shimon on Monday, Reuben on Tuesday, Shimon on Wednesday, and so on and so forth. Now Reuben goes ahead and frees the Eved, so now he has Sunday off, he has Tuesday off, and he has Thursday off. So that's the Gemara says, Divrei Beis Hillel, those are the words of Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says there's no problem over here. He has two owners, one of them freed him, so therefore half the week he's going to be free, half the week he's going to have to work for this other owner. The Shammai Yomrim, the Shammai says, Tikantim es rabo. Very nice. You worked everything out for the master, for the owner of this Eved. However, ves atzmo lo tigantem. This Eved over here is really up the creek without a paddle. Because it's true, it's very nice that he gets freed half the week. However, he can't live. Why can't he live? Because Lisa Shivcha, can he marry a Shivcha? Sure, no. He can't do that. Why Shekar Chesed Ben Chorin? He's halfway a free man. So he's no longer able to marry a Shivcha Kananis, a non-Jewish maidservant. Top of the Malach on the base, the Mishnah continues, Bas Chorin Yefsher, can he marry a free woman? No. Why Shekar Chesed Eved? Half of him is still an Evet, so he can't marry a regular Jewish Bas Chorin, so he's really stuck. What's left? The only thing that's left is Yibatel. He could sit there and not get married. Lo nivra olam el perivirivya. You can't do that to him. You can't tell him he can't get married his whole life. And the pasuk tells us that the world was created to be populated. We're supposed to have children. How is he supposed to have children if he can't get married? Now, interestingly, the Mishnah writes, how do we know that the world was populated for perivirivya? Nemar, for it says in the pasuk, Lo tohu bara el l'shavis yitzara. The world was not created just to be empty. It was created to be populated. So now, therefore, it can't possibly be that he won't be able to get married. So therefore, the Mishnah says, Elam Peitikon Olam says Beis Shammai, Kofin es Rabo, you go to the second person, Osa ben Chorin, and you force the second owner to actually free him, because the shtar achatzi damav, he has to write a shtar on half of his value, because the bottom line is, he got freed for no reason, so he has to actually write a note of an IOU note to the second owner, because he let him free. Beis Hillel heard this argument and said, you know what, it makes a lot of sense. It's true that originally we thought it made sense that he could be halfway free and halfway still working for somebody. However, it's true, we actually have a problem over here that we're making this guy get stuck here. He can't get married. Now, if you look at Tosfos, I don't know if we don't have enough time to go through this, but Tosfos asks a simple question. Mishnah says the world was created for perivirivya. Perivirivya literally comes from the pasuk which says, Pru urevu. People should be fruitful and multiply. So why does the Mishnah say the mitzvah is perivirivya, which comes from that pasuk? That's where the language comes from. And then quote a pasuk from Navi to tell us that the world was not created to be desolate and empty. So the Tosfos goes through a number of different answers, but I think the one that actually sticks out to me the most, at least according to my understanding of Tosfos, is it's possible that when it comes to the mitzvah pru revu, the person could just simply say, I'm an onus. There's a mitzvah for me to have children. I can't. What am I supposed to do? I can't get married. So from the mitzvah pru revu, the person, that's not going to be a problem. he's an ones. Not every mitzvah can a person accomplish. A person can accomplish the mitzvah. He can't accomplish the mitzvah, and therefore he's an ones. However, in any case when there's an ones, there's still the idea that the mitzvah wasn't, the result of the mitzvah didn't happen. And therefore, that's going to be a violation of the concept that the world was created to be populated. So, to point to the mitzvah, pruravu, well, we can simply say, what do you want from me? It's an ones. But to the consequence, to say we want the world to be populated, that's not going to happen. I mean, the famous example of this is when it comes to limud Torah. Many people can actually claim ones on limud Torah. They're so busy. They don't have any time to learn. Well, that's very nice. They may actually, I'm saying may, because this group over here actually shows that everyone here is busy, and still you find time to learn. But ultimately, let's say someone can't possibly come to learn. He's an ones. It's very nice. Might be an ones. Maybe he's going to be pater from learning, but he's still not going to know any Torah. And that's the concept, the idea. A person might be an onus from something, but if a person's always an onus from something, the consequence is that they never actually have the benefit of doing that mitzvah. In this case, he might be an ones, and he can't fulfill the mitzvah of pruravu, but the mitzvah of lo l'toah bara, the world wasn't created to be empty, it was created to be populated. And therefore, that's why the Mishnah uses that pasuk, because at the end of the day, the consequence of not being able to have children will always be that whether or not it's a violation of the mitzvah or not. Ultimately, Beis Hillel turned around and paskin like Beis Shammai. TORAH Rabbanon. We're running out of time over here. TORAH Rabbanon. Hamashachrer chatzi avdo Rabbi Amar kana v'chacham omrim lo kana. Once we're talking about the concept of a person, of a slave being, or a servant being halfway freed and halfway not freed, we're going to talk about a different case. Let's just again remind ourselves of what the Mishnah was talking about. The Mishnah was talking about a case where this Eved Kanani was owned by two people. In such a case, the case makes sense. Let's just use names. Ruvain and Shimon own Eved Kanani. Ruvain goes ahead and completely disowns from all of his possessions, his entire ownership over the Eved. Now the Eved is only owned by Shimon. That's the case which is a davar pashut that it's going to work. Our Mishnah discussed whether or not Shimon's now going to be obligated to let go of his ownership as well. Now, what happens if there's one owner of this Eved, and he decides, I want to relinquish half of my ownership over this one Eved? Can that be done, or can that not be done? So again, it's clear that a person can relinquish his entire ownership over an Eved and still leave a second ownership from another person. Our Gemara is now talking about what happens if a person owns the Eved entirely, but he wants to relinquish half of his ownership over this Eved. So in such a case, TORAH Rabbanon, HaMeshachar Chatzi Avdo, person is Meshachar, he frees half of his Eved. Rabbi Amar Kana, Chacham Amar Lo Kana. Machlokes between Rabbi and the Rabbanon whether or not that Eved actually becomes halfway freed. So let's remember all these names. They can be very important because there's a number of names in the Gemara. Rabbi and the Chachamim are the critical players in this machlokes. They are the ones who argue whether or not a person can relinquish half of his ownership over an Eved. Now we have to remember there's a Rabbah here and there's Rabbi Yosef. Because Rabbah and Rabbi Yosef are going to argue what Rabbi and the Chachamim were talking about. Amar Rabbah. Rabbah says, this machlokes between Rabbi and the Chachamim is b'shtar. If he frees the Eved with a shtar. The Rabbi Sabar, Rabbi is of the opinion, he darshans the psukim as well. V'hefta lo niftasa, chufsha lo nitin. The pasuk is talking about either a shifcha charufa or chatzi Eved chatzi ben chor. Shifcha charufa is where an Eved Ivri married a shifcha kananis, so it's a halfway freedom. The other one's talking about where the hefta lo niftasa is talking about where it was a hefta but not complete. There was a freedom done, but it wasn't a complete freedom. So now, makish shtar lekesef. we actually have a hekesh of shtar to kesef. Ma kesef, bein kulo, bein chesef. Just like when it comes to money, a person can go ahead and relinquish half their ownership. Afshtar nami bein kulo, bein chesef. So therefore, if he uses a shtar, he could relinquish half his ownership, but halfway or not, or the whole thing. Rabbanan gamri la meisha. We can see this price later on today's daf. They learn a hekesh of la meisha. Just like when it comes to isha, ma isha chetzia lo, person can't divorce half his wife. Af eved nami chetzia lo, person cannot free half of his eved. Avol bekesef. However, when it comes to money, divrei kol kana, according to Rabbah, everybody, both Rebbe and the Chacham, are going to agree that when it comes to money, a person can actually do a pidyon. An eved can do a half a pidyon, and peduya ve'ne peduya, you can have an eved which is halfway freed, halfway not freed. Let's just say that the following is the machlokes. The Mar Savar Kesha Difa. Mar Savar, that one Mad Amar holds that Hekesh is better. Umar Savar, Gzer Shava Difa. The other Mad Amar holds, no, Gzer Shava is better. Rashi explains each one. The Gemara says, no, Kuliyama, the truth is Gzer Shava Difa. Gzer Shava, everyone agrees that Gzer Shava is better than a Hekesh. And Rashi explains the reason for that is because Gzer Shava comes from Sinai, and essentially the pasuk is extra. That word is mufna, it's extra, and therefore it's going to be stronger than a hekesh. Shani hacha. In other words, everyone agrees that Gzer Shava is better. So why is it that the Chachamim, that Rebbe would prefer to use a hekesh? Shani hacha dikol mifrach mal isha sheken any yotze bekesef. The Gzer Shava is not so good because the comparison from isha to an eved is not the same. Why? Because a woman, one of the ways for divorce, learning Maseches Gittin, we know, she cannot be divorced by redeeming herself. There's no way to buy yourself out of a marriage. So therefore, it's not comparable. An eved can indeed monetarily redeem himself. Rabbi Yosef disagrees with Rabbah from earlier, and Rabbi Yosef says no, they're not having machlokas b'shtar. Rather, Rabbi Yosef says machlokas b'kesef. The argument is indeed when it comes to money, the Rebbe savar v'heftalon of which is peduya ve'ne peduya. Rebbe says when it comes to money, yes, you can have a half of redemption. Rabbanan say no. The pasuk says v'heftalon of dasa. It just means that's the way that people speak. It doesn't mean that there's a way to actually redeem yourself halfway with money. When it comes to shtar, so it's important to point out two things. There's two different points that they're arguing about. They're arguing about shtar and they're arguing about kesef. And this is going to become important because soon, in about one line, we're going to prove what the halacha is with shtar, but we're not going to prove what the halacha is with kesef. And then a line later, we're going to prove what the halacha is with kesef with money. I'm sorry that we're kind of running against the clock over here. It's a little bit complicated, but we'll try to make it as clear as possible. Meisr, the Gemara asks the kasha from Brisa. Hamashach chatzi avdo. Person goes ahead and frees half of his eved bishtar, clearly with a shtar. So who says this? Rabbah. I'm a Rabbah machlokas bishtar. Rebbe Amar Kana. Rebbe says he is Kana. Chacham Amar Lo Kana. Clear as black on white inside the Brisa. Then when it comes to a freedom with a shtar, that's where there is machlokes between Rebbe and the Chachamim, where Rebbe says yes, he becomes halfway freed. Chachamim say no, he's not halfway freed. So that says the Gemara, Tiyufta, to Rav Yosef, Tiyufta, it's a solid Tiyufta. Rav Yosef is incorrect, and Rav Yosef cannot say that when it comes to shtar, everybody agrees that it's going to work, because we clearly have a machlokes between the Rebbe and the Chachamim. Now the Gemara continues, B'shtar hu de pligi. We see that the machlokes is only by shtar. Aval b'kesef lo pligi. There's no machlokes by kesef. Therefore, limited to Rav Yosef betarti. Now let's just say when he said that they are arguing about money, he's also wrong about that. In other words, he's not only wrong about his statement that they don't argue about shtar, he's also wrong when he says that they do argue by kesef. Amalach Rav Yosef said no. Pligi b'shtar v'hu demekes. They argue about both. However, so why does it say in the Brisa shtar doesn't say anything about kesef? Why does it say shtar clearly in that Brisa and not kesef? To bring out the power of Rebbe, where he says that it's going to work to become halfway freed. So the Gemara says, okay, very nice. You're mentioning shtar to bring out the point of Rebbe that it's going to work and he'll become halfway freed. So mention monies like this, you can see that the Rabbanan say it doesn't work. The Gemara says, no, we always like to highlight the one who's going to be makel and be matir it, not because it's better to be makel, but when a person is makel and a person is actually matir something, it shows that they're much more thorough about the research, because people are not matir things unless they're absolutely certain that it's going to be mutter, and therefore when a person says something is mutter, we like to highlight that. Tashema. We're going to quickly read through this price. This is a bit of a long price, so just to go to the question. Tashema. Let's read this price. Vehefta. The pasuk says vehefta. Yachalakal. I think that means he's entirely freed. Tamalomer. No, lo neftasa. The pasuk says no, he's not freed. Lo neftasa. If it only says lo neftasa, yachalakal. I would say he's entirely not freed. Tamalomer vehefta. The pasuk says yes, he is freed. So it's confusing. Is he free? Is he not freed? So it's talking about ketzad. How do we understand this? Peduya ve'ena peduya. It's talking about where the person is redeemed but not redeemed. Bekasef. Money was used, or b'shavakasef, or something worth money. Clear. How do we know that you can do this? Halfway freeing. You can free him halfway with kasef and with shtar. It says v'hefta lo neftasa oichu pasha lo niten la. And that's referring to a shtar. So that's the hekesh that we talked about earlier. And later on it says the kasav law sefer krisis. He'll write for her a sefer krisis, a divorce document. Malala b'shtar. Just like when it comes to divorce, it's done with the document. Afkan b'shtar. When it comes to relieving an eved, it can be done with a shtar. I only know that if it's halfway done with money, or entirely done with money, then that's going, or entirely done with a shtar, that's going to work. How do I know? Clearly, this is what we're talking about. This is our discussion. Chetzyav b'shtar, minayin, that a person could use a shtar to free half the eved. How to know that works? Talmud Lomar says in the pasuk v'hefta lo niftasa. It says, the pasuk continues and writes the whole discussion over there. Makish shtar lekesef. That makes a hekish of it juxtaposes money to a document. Makesef and kula bechetziav. Just like when it comes to money, it doesn't make a difference if it's the whole thing or it's half of it. Afshtar nami bekula bechetziav. When it comes to shtar, whether he does the whole thing or half the thing, half of the freedom, it's going to work. So Bishlam Rav Yosef, according to Yosef, after he was already shown to be incorrect, Hamani Rebbe, it will still work according to Rebbe. El Rabba, according to Rabba, Reisha Divriyakal, the Reisha, it's going to be according to everybody because it's talking about money. The same for Rebbe, the end of this price is only going to work according to Rebbe. Amarlach Rabba, Rabba will say yes, in Reisha Divriyakal. We can indeed say that the Reisha was Divriyakal, but say for Rebbe, and the end was only Rebbe. We'll stop here by Rav Ashi. Have a wonderful day.